Good afternoon, everyone. This is the fourth session of our international web lecture series. And today, our first invited speaker is Professor Gautam Buddha Sural. I know that no formal introduction is necessary for the man, and I had the uh, I was quite fortunate to attend his classes as a student at Bangkok Christian College. Professor Gautam Buddha Sural is a professor of English and Culture Studies in Bangkok University, and he has been teaching since 1990. He started his career as a teacher in Bangkok Christian College in the Department of English. He went to Bristol University, UK in 2006 as a visiting fellow. In 2008, he joined the Department of English, Vidyasagar University, Midnapur, as a professor. A year later, in 2009, he came back to his old college and continued to teach there until July 2015. He is the author of a book, Hopkins and Pre-Raphaelitism, and has edited 4 books on the tribal life. He has presented papers in various conferences and seminars, and a number of his papers have been published in different national and international journals and books. His area of interest is Victorian poetry, Indian English literature, tribal, and Dalit studies. I would like to request Sir to deliver his lecture.
Thank you. Thank you, Saurav. I think I'm audible.
Yes, sir, of course.
Yes. Okay. So we mutually welcome each other, me on this side and my colleagues. I can see Himadrida also. I can see Nikhilesh. So I welcome you. So it's a mutual welcome.
So Dr. N.G. Mukherjee is also there.
Okay. So I welcome all of you. Professor Mukherjee,
Yes.
welcome to this session. Sharbani possibly is there or
Yes,
will be
sir.
joining shortly.
Mhm.
Okay, let me begin with a formal thanks to Saurav and his colleagues, Nikhilesh and others, for inviting me to this web lecture series. And thanks definitely to the Unda Mahavidyalaya Authority for organizing this kind of web seminar or web lecture series. So basically what my plan is that I have structured my lecture. So I will be presenting it before you. I have got some slides that I will show. And when I got actually the brochure containing the invitation for this lecture, the lecture series, my attention was drawn to 4 words that the brochure has used. One is COVID-19, alienated, the second word, thanatophobia, and stress. So those words prompted me to choose today's topic because we are in the midst of a situation when the words of the doctor in Shakespeare's Macbeth attending to Lady Macbeth seem very relevant. When Macbeth wanted the doctor to do something which could remedy the illness of his worthy consort, the doctor's reply, we all remember that, very significant. The doctor's reply was, I quote, "Therein the patient must minister to himself," unquote. Essentially, the doctor's point was that the malady is in the mind. Today, the pandemic has affected our psyche, and to maintain our well-being, we must minister to ourselves. So the title of my topic that you can see, I have already sent it to Saurav, and you can see it on the flyer, and now you can see it on the slide. I wake and feel the fill of dark not day, negotiating darkness through poetry therapy. And I think it is needless to say that the quoted words in my title are from one of Gerard Manley Hopkins's terrible sonnets. The words embody the fears, the apprehensions, the anxiety, the trauma that we are experiencing during this pandemic. Apparently, we don't see any remedy. No easy way out is possible, and that is making the situation grimmer and more depressing. People are confined to their homes and living a life of uncertainty. The confinement creates an isolation which at times is maddening. In the words of Dorothy Rowe, I quote from Dorothy Rowe, it is this peculiar isolation, you can see it on the screen. It is this peculiar isolation which distinguishes depression from common unhappiness. It is not simply loneliness, although in the prison of depression, you are pitifully alone. It is an isolation which changes even your perception of your environment. Even objects around you seem farther away, although you know it is not so. And while you are aware that the sun is shining and the birds are singing, you know, even more poignantly, that the color has drained from the sky and the birds are silent, unquote. So under such a situation, any discussion on poetry on the web may appear a needless luxury, a turning away from the raging problems of life that trouble people all over the world. Particularly, we think of the vast multitude of migrant laborers and their troubles. But one cannot deny that between poetry or literature in general and pandemics that occurred over the centuries, there has always been a close connection. In fact, it would not be inappropriate to say that pandemic literature or pandemic poetry has become a distinct and separate category. The outbreak of today's pandemic is, in a way, a pointer to the dangerous consequences of a mindless, mad rush for material progress and prosperity. Side by side, the insane desire for achieving political supremacy has led some nations to thoughtlessly indulge in exploiting knowledge of science and human resources beyond all limits. This mad material-mindedness has blinded them to the spiritual essence of life, which is the very basis of civilization. In my brief talk today, I would try to show how poetry, having a unique and direct relationship with human feelings, can act as a therapy against the trauma, fear, anxiety that people feel at the time of crisis and produce a change in their lives. Aristotle pointed out, we all know that, so I begin with Aristotle. So Aristotle pointed out the therapeutic function of tragedy. Aristotle's theory of catharsis points to the salubrious effect of tragedy on the spectator. In the third chapter of his book, Drama as Therapy, Practice and Research, Phil Jones traces the relationship between healing, drama, and theater. He says, you can see the slide, Phil Jones, he says, Aristotle proposed that the function of tragedy was to introduce the emotional and spiritual state of catharsis, a release of deep feelings that originally had a connotation of purification of the senses and the soul. The method by which the emotions of pity and terror are evoked is mimesis, a combination of vicarious participation and suspension of disbelief, unquote. Poetry likewise can play a very important role on the rehabilitative process in case of people suffering from various psychological ailments or disorders. Writing and reading poetry can have a therapeutic effect on the poets as well as on the readers. The poets, being men of the society, record their physical and psychic response to happenings around them, and the readers can immediately connect them with such compositions through a process of self-discovery. Elizabeth Drew, in her book Poetry, A Modern Guide to Its Understanding and Enjoyment, describes it in this way. I quote, "We read poetry because the poets, like ourselves, have been haunted by the inescapable tyranny of time and death, have suffered the pain of loss and the more wearing, continuous pain of frustration and failure, and have had moods of unlooked for release and peace. They have known and watched in themselves and others." Unquote. Thus, a feeling of togetherness is created and the psychic tension finds a release. The readers feel a psychological relief, which is induced by the poets from the other end. The poets express their pent-up feelings with which the readers feel a psychological affinity, and thus the resultant calm and poise is experienced at both ends by the poets and the readers. I would now very briefly focus on the emergence of poetry therapy in the 20th century, mainly in America, right? And this might create a little boredom in you, because this will be mentioning of certain years and some books and the authors, right? Let me give you an idea about this. Since a long time, there exists a close relationship between arts and medicine. Interestingly enough, in classical mythology, Apollo is the god of both poetry and medicine. Soranus, a Roman physician, is believed to be the first poetry therapist in the 1st century AD. He used to prescribe tragedy for patients who behaved in a crazy and violent manner, and comedy for those who suffered from depression. In 1916, Samuel Crothers first coined the term bibliotherapy. In the 1960s and 1970s, the term poetry therapy was generally known as bibliotherapy and was used to cure patients by the use of books or literature. By the 1960s, with the gradual evolution of psychotherapy, therapists were thrilled to discover that poetry therapy was a helpful means to cure mental illness, and they incorporated it into their practice. Poetry therapy began to thrive in the hands of professionals in various disciplines, including psychoanalysis, education, recreation, and the creative arts. The mental health professionals explored the therapeutic value of poetry by emphasizing the evocative value of literature. They advised their patients to record their responses after they listened to some poetical composition, and found that the patients were getting potentially benefited by the responses they jotted down. At times, they themselves wrote poems based on their own experiences, feelings, and sentiments. Their writings, whatever may be in quality or in quantity, help them resituate their mind in normal or near normal condition. This process allows them to vent out their pent-up feelings and help them unburden their psychological trauma. Some important American poets, like we know these poets as mainly belonging to the group confessional poetry in the mid-20th century in America. So some important American poets like Robert Lowell and Sexton and Sylvia Plath wrote poems as a means to get themselves cured. In the mid-20th century, poetry as a therapy was introduced in different American hospitals and mental asylums. Ellie Griefer, who was a pharmacist by profession and also wrote poems started a poem therapy group at Creedmoor State Hospital in New York. In 1959, he organized a poetry therapy group at Cumberland Hospital with the help of two psychiatrists, Dr. Jack J. Leedy and Dr. Sam Spector. Dr. Leedy edited two influential books. One is Poetry Therapy, which came out in 1969, and the other is Poetry the Healer, which came out in 1973. These books significantly contributed to the understanding of poetry therapy. In 1970s, Dr. Arthur Lerner established a Poetry Therapy Institute in Los Angeles, and he subsequently wrote a book, Poetry in Therapeutic Experience, which was published in 1976. In 1971, poet Ruth Lisa Sketcher was appointed as the first official poetry therapist at Odyssey House, a drug rehabilitation facility in New York City. She is the author of an important book, Poetry Therapy, a Therapeutic Tool and Healing Force, published in 1983. Let me quote from the introduction of the book, her own words. She says that poetry therapy is not new. It was first applied in 1751 by Dr. Benjamin Rush, often referred to as the father of psychiatry at Pennsylvania Hospital. She goes on to point out her own experience. I quote, "My aim was to offer poetry therapy as an energetic adjunct counseling therapy linked to psychotherapy, which might hasten recovery process by stimulating self-awareness and creative expression. My method included the use of selected contemporary poetry of relevancy. I sought to encourage residents to write out their feelings in their poems, from which painful experiences, anger, self-pity might be examined in group sessions. By so doing, residents might begin to like language, leading to verbalization and honest communication." Unquote. There are a number of poems by Gerard Manley Hopkins where the poet expresses his trauma, apprehensions, anxieties, which were not just the result of personal crisis. Rather, they were his anguished responses to the excessive materialism of Victorian society, which prioritized rapid and indiscriminate urbanization and industrialization at the cost of destruction of nature and human lives. The spiritual vacuity of Victorian civilization touched him, as it touched many of his contemporaries. The situation appeared to him as the worst. One of his dark sonnets begins thus. The sonnet is titled after the first line. Most of his sonnets are like that. The first line, and I have quoted few lines, you can read it on the screen. "No worst there is none, pitched past pitch of grief, more pangs wills, cooled at four pangs, wilder ring. Comforter, where is your comforting? Mary, mother of us, where is your relief? My cries heave, herds long, huddle in amain, a chief oh, world sorrow, on an age-old anvil wince and sing, then lull, then leave off." So you can see I have made use of the bold words in case of the phrase world sorrow. That is, the sorrow of the poet is not just personal. What the poet speaks here seems to be very relevant today. The lines capture very aptly today's predicament, compared to which nothing can be worse. People of different generations living in today's world have not seen a more dreadful situation than this. The poet says that the sorrow, the depression which the poem describes is not just an individual, is not just of an individual, it's the suffering of world humanity. The grief, in other words, is universal. So it's a general feeling of anguish and pain that people feel living in this world. And the speaker questions Mother Mary as to where is the relief, how to get out of this. Here, I will quote the words of L. Olberg from the preface of the book, The Use of Poetry in the Treatment of Emotional Disorders, where he pointed out that readers could find their predicament mirrored in the poet's sufferings through participation in his poetry. So I quote, "Poets have revealed themselves and have analyzed the human condition long before human behavior was conceptualized as a science. The poet entices participation. In effect, he says, here are my sorrows and my joys, my hopes and my fears. It pleases me to share them with you. If you see yourself in the mirror of my art and feel comforted or strengthened, follow me," unquote. During the middle of the 19th century, the bubonic plague proliferated worldwide, and in the last part of the century, influenza spread all over the world. Millions of people died during such epidemics. And many poets, many writers wrote about their feelings of fears and frustration. Hopkins did not write any poem on epidemic per se, but was concerned about the spread of tuberculosis, the dreaded disease which took away the lives of many industrial laborers in Victorian England. His poem Felix Randall begins with a sense of loss as Felix the farrier breathed his last. The sonnet mentions the dreadfulness of the killer disease, which slowly but surely took away the sap of life out of Felix's robustly built physique. But the poem never gives way to despair. If you read the poem, I will quote the lines, but the poem never gives way to despair. With a filling heart, the priest in the poem provides spiritual succor to the ailing Felix and prepared him for his last journey. See the lines. This seeing the sick endears them to us too it endears. My tongue had taught thee comfort, touch had quenched thy tears that touched my heart, child Felix, poor Felix Randall. So this is the mutuality of relationship that we can also find between the poet and his readers. The poem ends with the priest's tribute to the physical strength and beauty of Felix. The poem celebrates the bond between the healer and the healed, achieved through a transformative relationship between the two. Another of Hopkins's poems, Carrion Comfort, speaks of the psychological strength of the speaker to resist despair. I again go to the poem, Carrion Comfort. It goes like this, you can see it. Not, I will not carrion comfort, despair not fist on thee, not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can no more, I can something hope, wish they come, not choose not to be. So if we look at the line, first line, we find a peculiarity. The word despair is in capital. It is personified on the one hand, and on the other hand, the speaker expresses his undaunted spirit, which refuses to give in to despair. The word not is used, you can note that. The word not is used thrice in the first line, and this is an emphatic denial to submit to death and the resultant despair. Death and despair are very much interrelated, but the speaker resists both. Death can only be a comfort to man when he is in a desperate situation. And the poet is not ready for such a comfort because that would be spiritually defeating for him. Though the speaker here is extremely weary, he still wants to fight against despair and rather would rely on hope instead of yielding to despondency. He asserts that he would wish for the day, and the double negatives at the end of the fourth line, not choose not to be. See that line? So the double negatives at the end of the fourth line expresses his will not to die, but to live. In the sestet, he says that his mettle has been put to test by despair, but finally he has come out victorious as his heart lapped strength. I am quoting from the text, lapped strength, stole joy, would love cheer. So the poem actually reminds me of the words of Taro, a character in Albert Camus' novel, The Plague. I quote the words of Taro from the novel. Just see how relevant they are today and how closely connected these words are to Hopkins's experience, Hopkins's words in his poetry. I quote, "This epidemic has so far taught me nothing except that it must be fought at your side. I know everything about life, that everyone has inside it himself. This plague, because no one in the world, no one is immune. And I know that we must constantly keep a watch on ourselves to avoid being distracted for a moment and find ourselves breathing in another person's face and infecting him. And you need willpower and nervous tension not to let your mind wander. It is very tiring to be a plague victim, but it is still more tiring not to want to be one. This is why everyone appears tired, because nowadays everyone is little infected. All I say is that on this earth, there are pestilences and there are victims. And as far as possible, one must refuse to be on the side of the pestilence. So these words seem to me very relevant today. So my point in taking up poems by Hopkins for discussion is precisely the note of hope and spiritual rejuvenation that the poet always emphasizes on the face of despair and negation. The present day situation makes us feel like the speaker in I Wake and Feel the Fill of Dark Not Day, which I have used in the title. The line expresses utter hopelessness. The beginning of a new day is meaningless to the speaker, and he apprehends that this darkness would further intensify in the absence of spiritual sustenance which comes from within. But side by side, we can also fall back on lines like, "Mine, O thou Lord of life, send my roots rain," from another of Hopkins's poem, "Thou art indeed just Lord." In this poem, though the poet questions the dispensation of God's justice, finally he pleads for blessings of God, that he may be infused with new life and creativity. Hopkins's poems go beyond the issue of religion and speak of man's inner spiritual strength that has the power to sustain humanity against the catastrophe faced in life. The reading of his poems can act as a therapy for us today as we are engulfed by a seemingly never-ending darkness that seems to block hope forever. But however overwhelming the darkness may be, if we can kindle the light within, we can keep the gloom at bay and experience the spiritual succor that can help us maintain our calm and poise. We all know that Hopkins didn't have a long life, a life of 44 years only. And he suffered bouts of depression in his life, but ultimately he could transcend those bouts of depression because of the spiritual sustenance that he could inculcate within him always. As a priest, he always tried to do that. And I would like to mention here his words on his deathbed. When he died, Hopkins's last words were, I quote, "I'm so happy, I'm so happy, I loved my life," unquote. So poetry teaches us to fight the pestilence at our side. Reading and writing poetry is a liberating experience. One of the purposes of poetry is to help us make sense of ourselves in the world. It has the potential to change our attitude to people and things in the world, and has the power to transform readers from within. It may help us understand ourselves and our surroundings better, thereby enabling us to contribute to the world in a meaningful manner. As I conclude, I'd like to refer to the words of Diana Hedges, who in her book Poetry, Therapy and Emotional Life observes, I quote, "Poetry is about the life experience. It reminds us what it is to be human and how challenging that can be for all of us at times, but especially as teenagers. Poetry is about embracing life and love and letting go of fear. The creative process parallels the foundation of a clear and solid sense of self, allowing for play, openness, free thinking, discipline, risk-taking, trust, exploring boundaries, making fresh connections, experimentation, self-acceptance, and realizing potential. Unquote. So with these words of hope and positive feeling, I conclude my talk and wish you a healthy and safe life. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I think I have been able to maintain the time.
Yes, punctually. Yes, what can be more soothing nowadays than discussing poetry or reading poetry to heal the wounds of the mind? Now the floor is open for interactive session. I request the audience to ask your questions, or if you have any suggestion, any kind of
Yes.
comment on the lecture, you may proceed. Hello. Is there any question from the audience?
Yeah, hello.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good afternoon. Yes.
Yes, sir. Sorry, and thank you so much for this such a lovely presentation.
Thank
It
you.
was really overwhelming. Sir, uh, I just wanted to clarify just a little query that has occurred to me. What if someone reads the pessimistic kind of poetries of Hardy, like The Broken Appointment or something like that? And will it act as a therapy for him in these days? So can we just go by any kind of poetry, any sort of poetry, and can we feel rejuvenated? Because the nature of poetry, as far as I think, is multi-layered and multi-dimensional. There are all sorts of poetry. So I actually think that we need to have this certain self-censorship kind of a thing in which we can decide which kind of poetry we should go through to rejuvenate ourselves or to motivate ourselves in these gloomy times. I would love to hear your comment on this. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. If I have to answer your question in one sentence, let me mention that oft-quoted line: "Our sweetest
Yeah.
songs are those that tell of
The
saddest thoughts."
still of
So,
saddest thoughts. Yeah.
yes, yes. So naturally, whether you talk of Hari, whether you talk of any other poet, writing about the gloomy situation of life, writing about the darkness or the frustration that they feel, actually, when you read them, you share your feelings with the poets. And naturally, this kind of participation, even if there is not a word of single word of hope in that particular poem, that
Yeah.
can actually inspire you to tide over the crisis, because by sharing you can feel that you are not alone suffering from this kind of a plight, suffering from this kind of an anxiety, suffering from this kind of an apprehension. So naturally what you can do, or what readers can feel, is that oftentimes when they read the poems, they can feel a comfort despite the fact that those poems may not have a single word of hope in the literal sense of the term, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, but just one more thing, if I'm
Yes,
allowed.
yes,
Uh,
yes.
Isn't it true that Sylvia Plath used to write about all her anguishes and whatever she was feeling? And it was also a certain kind of a poetry, but ultimately she committed suicide. So it was that she was sharing all her thoughts with the people, and even then she has to do such a horrific, act. So is that true that we can fight these gloomy times by a mere reading of a poem or certain things?
Yes, yes, yeah, I understand. I understand your point. Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, all of them committed suicide.
Yes, sir.
Despite the
Yes,
fact
sir.
that they were confessional poets, they were expressing their anguish. But then
Yes, sir.
that is when, if you consider this as a kind of a defeat on their part, despite their resistance, despite venting out their fears and anxieties, ultimately they succumbed to mental pressures and committed suicide. When
Yeah.
that is true, let me refer to Kamla Das, who is the Indian counterpart of
Indian
confessional
confession.
poets.
Yeah, yeah,
She
sure.
also was driven by this feeling of death and this urgency to commit suicide many a time. And if you see her poems, you will find that there are ample references to sea. She walks to the sea and was about to drown herself, commit death by drowning. But then ultimately could survive, and she ultimately could save herself by adopting the confessional mode of poetry, by expressing her feelings. So yes, you can. I agree with you that Sylvia Plath and Sexton, they committed suicide despite the fact that they confessed. But then maybe
Yes.
the surrounding that was actually very overwhelming for them, overpowering for them, and they had to ultimately succumb to the mental pressure. But if you go for the novel, the single novel that Sylvia Plath wrote, Bell Jar, there you will
Yeah.
find that Sylvia Plath, how she talks about death, and she actually luxuriates on, as it she thinks about death. She is actually lying on in a bathroom. She is
Pregnant.
lying on the
Yeah.
bathtub, and there are rose petals, and she thinks of slitting her wrist, and the blood will spread, and she can metaphorically compare
Yes.
those petals, rose
Yes. Yes.
petals, with the blood. So that was there. The death wish was always there, right? But then, yes, I agree that ultimately they succumbed to that.
So can we agree to the fact that then this therapy becomes a subjective kind of a thing? It differs from person to person and the situations that a person is living in.
I think that would be quite a generalized statement. There are exceptions. Sylvia Plath and Sexton, I would rather place as exceptional cases, but then usually. Because if you see poetry therapy clinics in America, they are doing wonders. And in UK also, some hospitals, poetry therapy clinics are doing wonders. Music, we know, it is
Yes.
famous for doing wonders for patients. So naturally, I think we cannot make a generalized comment or
Straight.
come to a
Yeah.
generalized conclusion from the deaths of some of the confessional poets in America that ultimately it is subjective and ultimately it depends on individuals,
Of course.
right?
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Shura,
Thank you.
may I observe something? May I make a comment?
You are the most welcome.
Yes, sir. You are the most welcome.
Thank you, Gautam, for you actually introduced very interesting areas actually, and I am very grateful to you for mentioning that poetry reading and writing both are actually beneficial. Eh? Uh, as to the discussions that was going on, I would like to comment that mental illness like depression and other kinds of schizophrenia and other kinds of mental diseases, as you know, is a very difficult kind of fight. Okay, the patient fights and the relatives fight, everybody fights. Okay, it's a kind of struggle. But then poetry comes somewhere there when you hear reading poetry, somebody reading poetry, or when you read poetry, it has one kind of effect. But then you see that when you start writing poetry, that has a more powerful kind of effect. That is my experience, because you know that one of my students who suffered bouts of depression, I asked him to consult a counselor, and the counselor asked her to write journals, okay, daily journals, regular journals. And I understand that it was because that the counselor wanted her to express her pent up feelings. Then I suggested to her that why not write poetry? Okay, and she
Exactly.
started writing poetry, and in the process, she got so much involved that I think she improved, her conditions improved. But then you see, because it's a kind of active engagement, not passive engagement, but active engagement, you go on thinking about what to write, how to express yourself, how to give expression to the problems that you went through or you are going through. So it is a very, very engaging kind of activity which gives you a therapeutic effect.
Yes.
I believe that what you said is really, really effective, very effective in actual life. But you know that diseases are long and our fights must go on. Sometimes we win and sometimes we don't win. Thank
Exactly.
you.
Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, Himanshu. And in this connection, let me point out that the poems that you wrote about this crisis, the couple of poems that I read, and they were well circulated, they have already been published. They actually made us feel at one with the writer, the feeling that you are expressing or you have expressed in the poems. The moment we read, we find ourselves at one with you. So definitely, as the other side of the picture, and that is actually the thing, the kind of process followed by American hospitals and American therapists, poetry
Right.
therapists also, that they ask the patients to write. I have mentioned it also in my paper that they ask the patients to write their own feelings, because that
Right.
helps them to verbalize their internal feelings, and that actually helps them unburden their grief, their sorrow, their apprehensions. So I
Right.
absolutely agree with what you do. Thank you.
Right. Right.
Yeah, hello, sir. This is Nikhilesh. Hello,
Yes,
sir.
Nikhil Babu. Yes.
Sir. Sir, good afternoon, sir. Thank
Good
you for
afternoon.
such an illuminating deliberations on a new concept of discussion. But, sir, may Wordsworth be considered from this kind of therapeutic perspective? Because I once read that John Stuart Mill has referred to this Wordsworthian concept of poetry that has a kind of therapeutic value or therapeutic perspective, not from this perspective that you are talking of, but from the broader perspective. Just I want to mention. So it's your comment, sir.
Yes, yes, definitely. And the books of therapy, if you consult, you yourself, you are a poet.
Yeah.
And sorry for making a personal comment, but then your father, who was our teacher, was a poet of eminence.
Yeah.
So actually, Wordsworth, as you say, if you read the book that I have mentioned, Dinah Hedges,
Yeah.
the last comment from that book, if you read that book and if you read other books also, you will find that they are mentioning Wordsworth, particularly a poem like Immortality Ode,
Yeah.
where actually Wordsworth is talking about a compensation. When we grow up,
Yeah.
we lose the heavenly feelings of childhood.
Yeah.
But then growing up has its own compensation.
Yeah.
So that can soothe your mind. When you are
Yeah.
thinking of loss, you can also think of a gain or an achievement or a profit. So that way, definitely, Wordsworth's poems can have therapeutic effect. And as the first lady who was questioning me, putting her questions, so she also pointed out that Hardy, for example, one need not have to be a confessional poet or a poet of a special kind, because Hopkins was never confessional in that sense, but yet he was one of the most confessional poets, if I would, if I am permitted to say that. So always involving himself. So naturally, poetry of any kind can have a therapeutic effect on us, definitely.
At the same time, sir, Daffodils of Wordsworth, that is blissful solitude, very glaring example.
Yes, yes.
That blissful solitude of Wordsworth. And at the same time, sir, one more question that do you think that is there some kind of divinity or some divine experiences that are very much associated with this kind of therapeutic perspective? Because you mentioned Hopkins and I mentioned Wordsworth. So if we this pantheistic creed and Hopkins, we know all that. So do you think that there's a kind of divinity or this spiritual association?
Actually, yes, I would like to say that this goes beyond parochial religious limitations, right? The parochial definition of religion, it is more spiritual, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What I find is, whether you talk of Wordsworth, whether you talk of his pantheistic creed or Hopkins, they all rely on the spiritual essence of life. And that is actually what sustains you, right?
Yeah.
It's not merely religion.
Sure, may I ask something?
Identity.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, this is Oyon.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Sir, this is Oyon.
Yes.
Sir, first of all, thank you for this illuminating presentation today.
Thank you.
You quite appropriately quoted Felix's lines in your lecture, "This seeing the sick endears them to us, us to it endears," where you pointed out the mutuality in the relationship between the poet and the readers. So my question is, how far can we as literature teachers use poetry as a pedagogical tool to alleviate the fears and anxieties of our students? I mean, how far is it practicable? That is my first question. And second is, how does a rather esoteric poet like Hopkins, as we all know, he experimented a lot with syntax, language, how can such a poet fruitfully address the problems of the common, the downtrodden, or even the semi-literate? These are my questions, sir.
Okay. As far as the first question, I think individually we can help our students by our personal reading of poems, our personal reading of poets that we choose to read, right? So I think we all have our own sense of appreciation and our own sense of critically judging poems or a literary piece. So naturally, when we feel that a particular poem or a particular literary piece can be useful to alleviate the tensions of the teenagers, of the young minds like our students, we can always do that. So that we can always do. And as far as the second question is concerned, that is whether Hopkins can be used for the multitudes, a poet like Hopkins. Yes, that is definitely, I think partly I agree that maybe Hopkins is too esoteric a poet, or if I am not allowed to use the word esoteric, you used it, so that's why I'm quoting you. But because my perception of Hopkins is a little bit different anyway. But then if he is regarded as a poet, and even today when newer and newer interpretations, newer and newer evaluations are coming up on Hopkins by different critics, still many people believe that Hopkins was very much cocooned within his priestly self, and he never thought of people in general or society in general. But let me point out, I have mentioned it in one of my writings also, that Hopkins was even aware of the British colonial rule in India, and he wanted the British colonizers to leave India. In one of his letters, he mentions that, and I think I have written an article where I actually have quoted Hopkins's words, these words from a letter. But at the same time, what I find is that as far as popularity is concerned, that definitely he did not enjoy during the Victorian period, and it was his apprehension. From that apprehension, he did not want his friends or close associates to publish his poems. But at the same time, if we are choosing Hopkins for this kind of a seminar or this kind of a session, this kind of discussion or lecture, then I think Hopkins is one of the poets whom we can very easily choose, and we can, if not directly take him to the common people, his messages can always be communicated to readers who actually live maybe I think doubly distanced from poets like Hopkins, right? Hopkins is a poet who needs some minds who are extra sensitive, if I may use this term, or extra intellectually capable, because his syntax, as you mentioned.
So he needs a mediator, sir.
Yes. So you need it needs a teacher like Ion to take up to the downstream, to the ordinary readers, right? So this is my answer.
Don't embarrass me, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Sir, I think Samosri wants to say something.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Sir,
Yes.
good afternoon, everybody.
Yes, good
Just a little observation. If tragedies can be therapeutic, then of course sad poetry can also be therapeutic. We cannot
Yes.
of
Very
catharsis.
appropriately said. Yes.
And can we deny the fact that Proof Rock or Wasteland, don't they have therapeutic elements in them? I think they are very therapeutic. In fact, I think they have more therapy of consoling the soul than the poetry of Wordsworth. This is my observation.
Definitely, because they are more close to our time, because they are more close to our fragmented selves. So naturally,
Yes.
they are better equipped to treat the maladies of the present time, definitely.
Yes.
I think the
Sir,
process started in the Victorian period when we are talking about Hardy and other poets, right? The process started itself with Hardy, or in
Yes,
the Victorian period, maybe with Arnold, Matthew Arnold.
yes,
When
all
we are
these
talking
poets,
about the
they,
problems that are lives.
yes, yes,
Yes.
Our love, let us be true.
sir, may I add a comment here?
yes, please.
Sir, actually, I was just reading this thing because I had a talk at Bhagalpur College, TNB College, and I delivered a lecture on that very topic. So during that time, I was reading literature as a healer, various papers, etc. So I came across a reference that gave me a very important information that this use of literature as a healer is not a new thing. Even in ancient Greek, by the sanctuaries of Asclepius, there used to be a theater, and all the patients who were crowding to the sanctuaries of Asclepius, he was a doctor. They were supposed to watch theatrical performances at night. And one thing I should say, sir, Abhavya Ratnam asked a very pertinent question that whether the poems of depression, the poems of degradation and decay, can they be used for therapeutic use? Samustri has already pointed out that yes, those poems can also be used therapeutically, because I believe that poem or any kind of poem or any kind of literary text has cathartic effect on the mind of the readers. So even though we read those poems of depression or personal anguish, they will teach us to get over our personal problems, because poetry or any kind of literature delights us aesthetically, fills our mind with aesthetic pleasure, and at the same time distracts us from our personal problems. Thank you, sir.
Yes, 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 quite true.
Thank you,
Hello,
sir, for the wonderful
Yes.
lecture.
Thank
hello.
you. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Very wonderful lecture, sir.
Thank you.
I am
যেটা বলে আর তুমি ওটা দেখে নিও, তুমি যদি মাঝে কোনো রেকর্ড করে করেছো তাহলে কিন্তু তাহলে ইয়ে নেওয়া হবে না, মানে ওই ওই দিকে
Samustri.
Hello, hello.
Yes.
hello,
Uh,
hello,
yes,
hello, sir. Nowadays, what
yes,
we see that music therapy is also being given to the patients of depression and
yes.
schizophrenia in India, and the results of Jagjit Singh are being, you can say, given as a therapeutic effect to the patients. And in this pandemic, COVID-19, what we see, hello,
Yes, yes,
hello,
yes. I can hear. I can hear you.
okay. So what we are seeing that in this pandemic, there is a kind of hopelessness because what Eliot has said in his poetry, The Wasteland, and ultimately he has talked about in a very optimistic manner. He has closed his The Wasteland, and in that very da 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 shanti shanti shanti. What I want to ask that there is a kind of poetry, spiritual poetry, which can help us, and it has some type of healing power or a therapeutic effect on our minds.
Yes, yes, definitely, definitely. Uh, Eliot returns to Upanishads, as you mentioned. So,
Yeah,
yes, so that definitely has ultimately the healing power, because ultimately there is rain. The journey is a quest. The journey that we
yeah,
find in the in search of the Holy Grail. The journey
yeah,
ends with hope, definitely. May not be that was maybe that was not available in Eliot's own culture. So Eliot had to come to the Orient. So naturally, the three does at the end of the poem, datta datta daddham and damyata, these three words, and then
yes,
when the poem ends with Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, definitely they bring solace to the suffering multitude.
Solace.
And as far as the music therapy is concerned, I think all of us remember. I don't exactly at this point remember the name of the violinist who played on violin a particular raga, Darwari Kannada possibly, and which recovered a patient who was in coma for, I think, more than 25 days. And after coming back to life, that the family and the patient acknowledged the gratitude, their gratitude to the violinist. And the doctors now say that, and the musicians, they say that there are particular ragas, the playing of which can cure particular diseases. So music therapy, again, is very much in vogue, even in India. And I think the hospitals, COVID patients, if they can arrange this kind of music therapy for the patients, that would be mentally very much supportive and reassuring for those patients.
Comment, very
Including
small
poetry.
comment.
Thank you.
Gautam, can I just?
Yes, Sarvani. Please, Sarvani, can you hear me? Hello. Saurabh, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, sir, but Sharbani ma'am is probably disconnected.
Madam is not audible. I think she's got disconnected.
No, she's disconnected due to some network issue, I think.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Is there any other question from the audience?
I think Professor Bhattacharya is waiting for the next session. Hello.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes, Professor Bhattacharya is waiting for the next session, I think, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So let us end the first slot. The second slot will be hosted by Ashim Kumar Betal. He's a faculty in the Department of English, Onadhana Mahavidyalaya. So I would like to request Ashim Kumar Betal to take the charge for hosting the second slot. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes, Professor Gautam Buddha Sural. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Nag. And special thanks to Professor G. Sural for his elegant of observation. I am Ashim Kumar Betal, faculty member, Department of English, Onadhana Mahavidyalaya.
Yes.
Now I would like to start our second session. I again thank you all for being in this virtual platform. And I also acknowledge the presence of our honorable second speaker, Dr. Shreya Bhattacharji, Associate Professor in the Department of English Studies, Central University of Jharkhand, Ranchi, India. Dr. Shreya Bhattacharji, who has published widely and has been invited to numerous conferences in India as also in the United States, France, Hungary, South Africa, South Korea. Her academic interests include post-colonial studies, especially African, Afro-American, Caribbean, queer and women studies, and contemporary literary theories. Formerly, she was a civil services officer. She also nurtured a keen interest in human rights, tribal and gender issues also. Dr. Bhattacharji is now going to address us today with our topic, and the topic is Women and the Pandemic and Thereafter. Please, Dr. Shreya ma'am, you are requested to share your thoughts. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
You are audible.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the very kind introduction. And I thank Dr. Shorav Nag and Onda Thana Mahavidyalaya for having me here today.
Welcome.
I would be speaking on women, the pandemic, and thereafter. To begin, I would like to say that the pre-pandemic, pre-COVID era, if we may use that phrase, was no bed of roses for women across continents, across cultures, across class, across religion, across ethnicity, across nationalities. Every inch of space that women enjoy today is hard won after immense struggle. I would request Dr. Nag to show us the protest song from Chile, which has gone on to become the feminist anthem, and I'm talking only of November 2019.
Okay, ma'am. I'm playing.
Yes, please.
I request the audience to pin the video on your screen so that you can have a full screen experience.
Is it audible? Dr. Shorab, can you please check it once? Dr. Betal, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Hello. Very sorry.
Yes,
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I
You are
believe
audible.
there is some problem.
Yes,
Most of
you
the
are audible.
participants couldn't. I believe most of the participants couldn't hear the audio. I mean, it was only visible. Neither could I.
Song is not audible, but you are audible.
Ma'am, we
Can
could
you
see the video.
play it once? But
Okay,
the
okay,
music
ma'am. I'm playing it.
couldn't. Can you just check both the
Ma'am,
audio and?
ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Yes.
The sound of wind is coming, I hope, through your mind, and that is why.
Through the mic. But I'm
True,
not
true.
using
Yes,
any
sound of
separate mic.
no, no, no. Is there any fan or anything? Some heavy wind-like sound is coming through. No.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, ma'am. It's okay. I'm replaying the video, ma'am.
I'll just.
Yes,
please.
I'm replaying the video. Yes.
Yes, please. Just check the audio also.
Yes, I'm sending the audio.
Ma'am, if you have not been able to hear it, was it audible?
No, ma'am. Video was visible, but the audio
Hello?
was hello. It was not audible,
Hello,
but
yes.
it visible. Hello, it was not audible, but
It,
but it was visible, ma'am.
okay, it's all right. Right, I would will not spend more time on it. I would request the audience. It's available on YouTube. Please, you can listen to it on your own. It's one of the most powerful song and dance sequences on what is the situation of women. What was the situation of women in the pre-COVID era? And I would like to proceed from there to talk about what is the situation in what we can call the pandemic COVID era. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So what I see is that the struggles of women have aggravated in the pandemic or COVID era. As the Romanian German 2009 Nobel laureate Herta Muller would say, life for women in the pandemic era has become a life of everyday terror. And why is it so? I would just like to show you a couple of slides and then I will just talk. Right? Shaurabh,
Hello? Ma'am, check at the right hand side of your page, to, near the bottom of your page, near the taskbar. Present now.
yes.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, first open the PPT and then click on present now. You will see three
Is it
tabs.
visible now?
I hope it is. Yes, ma'am. It is visible. It is
Is
visible.
it visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And am I audible as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right.
Yes, ma'am.
So the first slide that I show you is about the 7 major issues affecting women and girls during the COVID-19 pandemic. You can see the slide for yourself. This is how the researchers have divided it. There are issues of health and well-being. There are issues of the healthcare system. And obviously there are economic issues. Now, in the health and well-being issue, one of the major issues is that of domestic violence, pregnancy-related issues and death. In the healthcare system, there is the issue of the frontline health workforce, and there is also the issue of access to health services. In the economic section, there is the issue of greater domestic work, job losses, and reduced financial independence. We will now look at one of the major issues, that is the issue of domestic violence, which has shown a huge spike during this period of the pandemic, the lockdown period. In many countries worldwide, such as Jordan, Italy, Brazil, Germany, domestic violence is reported to have increased 3 times. In United States, it's 20%. In India, it is 50%. In Turkey, it is 38.2%. In South Africa, it is 37%. In the United Kingdom, it is 25%. In Australia, it shows 75%. In France, it has increased by 32%. If we look at these statistics in the form of a graph, this is how it would look. and it is a very, very scary graph. The UN chief Antonio Guterres has repeatedly warned against the horrifying global surge in domestic violence. In fact, he has stated that peace is not just the absence of war, and he says that it is a tragedy that women are facing violence where they should be safest, that is in their own homes. And he has urged the governments of different countries to put women's safety first as they respond to this pandemic. If we come to India and look at the statistics provided by the National Commission for Women, it shows that in the first week of March, it received 160 complaints, whereas in the last week of March, which was the first week of the lockdown, there were as many as 275 complaints, of which 69 were complaints of domestic violence. Now, if this is so, we have to think that most of the statistics we wouldn't even be knowing, because what the National Commission for Women receives, it receives through email, and it is anybody's guess in this gathering that how many women have access to it, especially in the rural areas. Now, if we look at this spike in the cases of domestic violence, we see a strange trend. That is, it is there both in the developed countries and in the developing countries. In fact, if you have been following this news closely, as I have been, you will find that the French government has said that women who face a threat to life in their own homes can check into hotel rooms, and the bill would be footed by the government of France. In Spain, Italy, France, Germany, the pharmacy stores, the pharmacy stores have been given the right to alert the police if any woman approaches and informs them about domestic violence. In many such countries, perhaps you'll be surprised to know that the grocery outlets have been given an office wherein there are office bearers of domestic violence shelters. Women can go out of their home on the pretext of buying grocery and then approach them and then go to the shelter home. But these are statistics, you see, for developed countries. In fact, in Spain, the government has also said that if required, a woman can break the windows, the doors, whatever, to save her own life. But what about developing countries? What about a country like ours? What happens to women who are locked with the perpetrator in their own homes? This is an issue which all of us need to think about. Perhaps most of you know that during the Ebola crisis, there was a similar increase in the number of domestic violence cases in the affected countries. The next issue which I would like to talk about is the issue of increased burden of domestic and care work. Now, if we talk about families like ours, middle class families in the developing countries, also in the developed countries, you see, today most women are working women, they are working from home. The children are having online classes at home, husbands also working from home. So in these circumstances, what happens? The woman has the job of obviously cooking and cleaning. You have to remember that most of the domestic helps have been asked not to come. So the woman would cook, the woman would clean, the woman would help the child in the online classes, the woman would also do her own work, and thereafter she would also do and kind of care for her husband and in-laws also. there is a very interesting trope, I call it the trope of the superwoman. You say a woman can do this, a woman can do that, and a woman can do this much more, and she ends up doing all that in the process completely expending herself. If we use a Bengali trope, we can call it the myth of the Dashabhuja. You work with 10 hands, and at the end of the day, what do you have? In this regard, I would request the audience, you can also listen to Nandita Das's 7-minute movie, which is called Listen to Her. It has been, she has collaborated with the National Commission of Women, and together they have produced this short movie, which is called Listen to Her, and you can listen to it yourself. Another issue which is of great concern is the issue of increased risk of unwanted pregnancies and pregnancy-related deaths. Because at this juncture, you see, both the woman and the child are at high risk. There is a high risk potential, especially when the question of visiting hospitals occur. In the developed countries, there is an additional risk. That risk is for elderly women, because most women, if you look at the statistics, they outlive men in these countries, and they are alone, they are more at risk, and they're not used to digital devices. You see, so you must have seen as it is, the rate of deaths for senior citizens has been very high in the developed countries. When it comes to a developing country like ours, there is the problem of reduced access to health services and exclusion from potential COVID-19 treatments. As it is in developing countries, women, especially women in the semi-urban, rural areas, urban slums, have less access to medical treatment, and that aggravates in a situation like this. The next issue, which I would also like all of you to think about, is the issue of the frontline health workers, most of whom are women, especially if you look at the entire nursing community across the world. And if you also look at the cleaning staff in hospitals, different medical establishments, it is mostly women, and they are greatly at risk. If we look at the economic scenario, and if we talk about the higher rate of job loss, in the coming months, there is obviously there is going to be a recession, there is going to be a huge economic slump down. And in that, the first scapegoats, the first martyrs are obviously going to be women, who are going to lose their jobs first, which will obviously mean lesser financial independence, and the job prospects in the future prospects would also come down. Now, in the case of the working class, especially the migrant workers, this situation is particularly bad. I personally feel that the migrant workers who have gone home, especially the women, they have very little chance of ever coming back to work in the cities again. Very little chance. That is one thing. The next thing is they will have to manage home with very limited financial resources now. In fact, if you have been following the Times of India, in yesterday's Times of India report, it was stated that 85% of domestic helps across the country have not been paid during these 3 lockdown months. You see, and that makes me think that how is it that these migrant workers who are working in cities for years together still continue to be migrant? You see, the city never really becomes a home. It is only the place where they come, they work, and when the situation becomes bad, they are forced to leave. in across countries, and also in among all the classes, I think what will also increase is pay cuts and job losses for men, which in turn, would impact upon the women, because the anger and the frustration would be vented out on women. In fact, what I foresee, you may say that I feel very pessimistic. I do. What I feel is that there is a possible, there is a very pertinent possibility of female feticide increasing after the economic slump down. This is what I find. And not only feticide, I also feel that there will be an increase in femicide also. Now, what we have to understand is that women have been by and large excluded from policy making, from decision making. There are exceptions, of course, like Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, for example. But mostly, women have been excluded, and what a crisis like a pandemic that we are facing now requires specially tailored, sensitive policies for women. Now, how to get that is anybody's guess, and you just saw in the slides what the UN General himself is saying. I was also thinking about what would happen to the women in the red light areas. What happens there? Theirs is a double whammy, you see. You have to choose. If you have to choose between hunger and COVID, what do you choose? Is that any choice at all? This is a question that I pose to all of you, because we need to think about these issues. We'd be happier to push these issues under the carpet, but these are issues which we need to think about. Now, I have also been thinking as to what would be the new normal for women. Like, do we learn to live with Corona? Do we learn to live with Corona and simultaneously also learn to live with violence? This is the question I'm asking you. What is going to be the new normal? That we live with Corona, we live with violence? As the noted Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe had said, post-colonization also, the African continued to be, the African was a brother, but nonetheless, the African was a junior brother, a lesser human being for the progressive white. So what is the situation for the woman in the pandemic era? Do we continue to live as lesser humans, who have the chance of being a target of domestic violence, other kinds of violence every day? This is the question that I would like to put to you. There is another question which has been really bothering me, and the question is, why does it seem as if the violence on the street has gone to the home? And if the violence on the street has gone to the home, then the question is, who was stalking whom? Who was the predator? Is the predator COVID-19? Or is the predator some men? This is a very difficult question which I would like to ask you. Why is it that violence has now come home? What is happening? Now let us move on to the next issue, that what would happen in the, it is still hypothetical, in the hypothetical post-pandemic era. Like if we discover a vaccine, if there is a post-pandemic era, what would happen in that post-pandemic era? When the rules of social distancing would no longer apply on the streets, would women be safer on the streets? Would women be uh, would they feel more safe on the streets? Would we have learned our lesson? And when I say we, I mean all of us, men, women, all of us. Would we have learned our lesson? Uh, would our mindset have changed? Because ultimately it is about changing the mindset. Would our mindset have changed? Or or would the perversion skyrocket and no woman be safe either at home or in the streets? We have to think both sides. Will the mindset change? Would women be safer, or would it be the opposite? Would no woman be safe either in the street or at home? I would like to show you just one more slide from which is a very favorite quote of mine, from Irfan Khan's movie Madadi. I'll just show that slide to you. Saurabh, if I may.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Of course. Please.
Yes, yes.
Yes, it's showing. It's showing.
Yes, this is the slide. I always think about it. It reads, "Baz चूजे पे झपटा उड़ा ले गया, कहानी सच्ची लगती है लेकिन अच्छी नहीं लगती, बाज पे पलटवार हुआ, कहानी सच्ची नहीं लगती है लेकिन खुदा कसम बहुत अच्छी लगती है." This, as I told you, is from my favorite Irfan Khan movie, Madadi. One of the few movies, where there is one conclusion and then there is the conclusion is withdrawn and it comes up with another conclusion. I wish that in the post-COVID era, we can have the reverse. That is, instead of the chuja being caught by the barge, we have the chuja reacting for once. I wish that would happen, of course, but well, it is all about changing the mindset. Finally, I would like to say a couple of things more. One is, your house may be safe, my home might be safe. I might not be a victim of violence or any other issue. You might not be. But the question is the maid who is working for me safe? Is my student safe? Is the neighbor safe? Have we, are we thinking about these issues? Or have we stopped thinking about these issues completely? In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine, a leading doctor, who said something very pertinent yesterday. She said that I have a fear that the mask which guards our mouth and nose is also guarding the eyes. We are not really watching. And that reminded me of Gandhari and her willful blindfolding. If you choose not to see, then who can save others? Who can save society, so to speak? Are we really looking at what is happening around us? Or has the pandemic somehow created such isolated ivory towers that we dare not look out anymore? This is the question I would like to pose to you. And when I speak about all these issues, I'm aware that there are many men who are with us. It is not a question of men versus women. In fact, there are several organizations in many parts of the world which are called Men Against Violence. It's not that each man is a predator. It is not that each man is an enemy. I'm not saying any such thing. What I'm trying to say is that in the new normal, can we be together? Can men and women we be together? And when a man stands up for violence against women, let that not be an exception. Let that be the normal. This is how I would like to envisage a post-COVID, post-pandemic era. I would like to end this. I hope this time the video will work. If you would, Sharav, if you would please play one of my very favorite songs, Tracy Chapman's Behind the Wall.
Yes, ma'am. I'm trying.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Not sure. Sort of, it seems the audio is again not there. What is happening? Can we play it directly from the YouTube link?
Yes, ma'am. I'm
If you would please try to play it directly from YouTube.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please.
I'm playing this from YouTube.
Yes. Yes, please.
Yes, ma'am. Just wait. I'm playing this.
Yes.
At all.
Yeah, I think. So yes, thank you, Sharuk. So that was Tracy Chapman singing, the noted African American composer and singer. And the tragedy is that it still remains so true, So with that, I would like to conclude, and I'm open to questions, comments, observations.
Hello.
Thanks a lot to Dr. Bhattacharji for our valuable observations on women, the pandemic, women violence, and domestic violence, and so on. Now the floor is open for interactive session. If anyone who wants to ask any questions or give any observations on it. But remember one thing: when you ask any questions, you have to unmute yourself and you may ask. Then unmute it and wait for answer. Please, madam, please.
Hello.
Yes, yes.
Hello.
Please.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Hello. Good,
You are audible.
good
You are
afternoon.
audible, sir. You are audible.
Hello. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Ma'am, I'm from Himachal. I'm teaching in a college. Ma'am, you have talked about,
Yes.
you have given the data. Uh, Teacher, was a Greek girl, Leda, who was raped by Jews, Leda and by WPA. And I think that in post-COVID-19, there a kind of in disguise, in the form of disguise, that they will do such attempts in future.
Sorry, I couldn't really get the question. If you would just, it was
May I type?
very erratic. I couldn't really get the question. Yes, please.
May I type it?
Okay, please. Write in the chat
Hello.
box. Write in the chat box.
Hello.
Yes. You're audible.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Uh,
Hello. Yes. Yes.
Hello. Am I audible? Am
Yes,
I
you're audible.
audible?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
you're audible.
Yes, yes.
Okay, ma'am. I'm Moitri Chakraborty from Shiliguri. Ma'am, I have a question for you. You talked about the instance of domestic violence being aggravating itself in this COVID era. Besides this, domestic violence cases of divorce are also being filed rampantly in this time. But ma'am, my question is that if this COVID would not have been there, the like women who are victim of domestic violence at this point of time, would they have prevented themselves from such thing even in a near future if this COVID was not there?
See, this is
Is
what
it
even I
only?
had been thinking about, and as I told you, I have. Yes. Please continue.
Ma'am, I was thinking that the hello.
Sorry, you are not audible. Yes. Yes. Now you are audible.
Hello. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Please.
Now you are audible.
Ma'am, I was asking that if this COVID era would not have been there, the cases of domestic violence, the women who are victims of domestic violence, is it only because they are bound to stay at home altogether for a much longer? Hello.
Hello.
Oh God, I think I'm
Okay.
not audible.
Okay. Could you please type your question in the chat box? Hello,
Sure, sir.
Moitri.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh, okay. Hello, ma'am.
Yes. You're audible.
Yes.
Avabhya.
Am I
Yes, you're
okay?
audible.
Yeah. Ma'am, it was a very good deliberation, rather an excellent one. And you see, I'm an optimistic kind of a person, but the things that we are facing nowadays has literally made me feel and realize that we are nowadays
Hello, you're no longer audible.
Yes, actually, there's a huge network problem today. Please, audience, please write your questions in the chat box, please. Please write your questions in the chat box.
Shurab, I think it would be. Shorab, I think it would be a better idea if you take the questions from the chat box and
Yes,
ask.
yes.
Is
All
that
of
okay?
you are requested to text
Yes.
your questions
Please,
in the
please
chat box.
type it in the chat box. Yes, so that we may read it out for yourself. On behalf of,
Okay.
yeah.
Hello. Ma'am, there is a question
Hello, yes.
from Moitri Chakraborty. Ma'am, would not the woman being subjected to domestic
Yes.
violence at a later point of time if this COVID issue was not there?
See, the way I look at things, and the thing that I was trying to explain is this: that that domestic violence was there in the pre-COVID era is a fact. What I was trying to stress, and that is why I showed all the statistics, is that the situation has aggravated during the COVID era primarily because the predator and the prey, I'm using very strong words, but I have no choice because the predator and the prey are confined within the four walls of the house. You see, so the situation becomes worse, and that is why the situation aggravates. Earlier, you see, the woman had the opportunity, she might be working, she could go out to her friends, maybe to her parents, but now the situation is such that they are condemned to stay together day in and day out. So that is the reason why there is such a huge spike. And as I told you, even during the Ebola pandemic, which a couple of years back, the situation was similar. It had aggravated in those countries primarily because of this reason, because of this confinement. And the violence is targeted mostly at the women, but also many times against the children also. This is the reality of our times, the reality is in which we are living.
Another question from Riyanka Sharma. Ma'am, you talked about some steps have been taken in developed countries like France. My questions are there any steps taken in developed countries, especially in India?
I knew that this question would obviously come, but that in a country like India, as it is, the concept of domestic shelters, we hardly have any domestic shelters. So what the National Commission for Women has done is that it has started a WhatsApp, link, so that women can, even if you're not able to phone because people might overhear, or if you're not able to mail, you can just send a WhatsApp message. This kind of small initiatives are being taken, and some of the NGOs are taking some initiatives. But in a large scale, as it has happened in the developed countries, where each pharmacy, each grocery store is acting as a safeguard, that has not happened in any of the developing countries, unfortunately. And with that, I would also like to add, you see, that even if you want to make a phone call, or if you want to send a WhatsApp message, or if you want to send a mail, you have to have access to minimum digital facilities, which is still today not a possibility for majority of women in our country. This is the truth which we all of us have to accept.
Ma'am, there is another question from Arunima Kundu. During the pandemic, the pressure of work is more on women than men. Ma'am, it is because we are living in a male-dominated society. It is a social norm because of stress or financial difficulties or any other reason.
Yes. No, no, see, this is the problem. Of course, we are living in a patriarchal world. I mean, there is no reason not to accept that. Of course, we are living in a patriarchal world, and the societal norms are such. And moreover, girls are trained from childhood to accept those norms. You know, you kind of grow up internalizing those norms and thinking that they are normal. And that reminds me of one of my favorite texts, that is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, where the 11-year-old Pecola grows up thinking that the beauty norm should be a pair of blue eyes. I'm sure many of you are conversant with this, that what is the accepted norm of beauty? It is blue eyes, blonde hair, fair skin, and a zero figure. You know, that is the norm that is internalized by even a black child. Similarly, in a country like India, we also grow up internalizing what a woman should be like. So obviously, knowingly or unknowingly, we also help boost up this patriarchal infrastructures. And so what happens is, in a situation like the pandemic, what is expected? And that's why I asked all of you to please watch Nandita Das's 7-minute movie, listen to her, where she shows exactly this, you know, that the woman is expected to do the housework, she is expected to be a master chef, she is expected to be an excellent teacher, look after the, you know, online classes of a child. She is also expected to be the perfect wife, and tend to the husband, the in-laws. These are the expected parameters, you know. And obviously that, and in addition to that, you are also supposed to keep up with your own work schedules and excel in that. So obviously this concept of the superwoman is a very dicey trope.
One more question. Do fathers even allow individuality of daughters who still believe in dowry system?
Could you please repeat that question?
Do fathers even allow individuality of daughters who still believe in dowry system?
See, as I told you, I have nothing against most men, and I very strongly believe that there are many progressive men in the world and many progressive fathers. In fact, I also believe that when you see a very strong woman, you should always understand that there is a very strong father behind her who has not differentiated between her and maybe her brother, you know, who has taught her to be as strong. So there would be many fathers who would be supportive of their daughters, but unfortunately there are many fathers and mothers who support feticide and who also support femicide. So you see, you cannot generalize and about these things. You have to go from case to case, and you have to understand that basically we are living in a patriarchal world where things are difficult from the moment a child is conceived and goes up right up to her death.
Ma'am, this is history here. There was a scene in movie Article 15 where the two girl child laborers were badly raped and killed just because they had asked for an increase in pay. Do you think such violence against child laborers would increase under the excuse of honor killing?
It is very difficult to to predict, but what we can all see, you know, and I suggest none of us be Gandhari, what we can all see in the future is a definite economic recession that we can all foresee. So if that be the case in a developing country and a poor country like ours and other poor countries like ours, there are going to be, you know, very difficult circumstances for a majority of poor families. And in that case, what would be the repercussion on the women and the young children? Anyone can understand, you know, that in the post COVID era, if there is a vaccine, I don't know, maybe yes, maybe young children would be forced to go to work. I really don't know. It is for us to wait and see, and maybe this is the time when we can introspect and think about alternatives. What we can do. What are the possible viabilities? What are the possibilities for the future?
Yes, understood. This is Sanjukta. Man and woman face the problems of violence everywhere. Do you really think the post-COVID-19 can change the mindset of the people?
That is why I showed you Irfan Khan's slide. I do not know if it is possible. We all know which is the story, but that's a very nasty story. So what I would want is that each one of us, it begins, you see, as Chinua Achebe says, that no revolution happens overnight. It is always piecemeal, it is always slow, it goes day by day, by small steps. You see, so the point is, if so many of us are talking about this issue, and most of us are either teachers or researchers or students, so maybe we will talk to 5 people more, and maybe another 5 people more, and so it is like a chain reaction, which will perhaps make many people think differently. It is only when you begin to think differently, that a change can occur. That's what I said, that the point is, if a man is against violence, it is not an exception, it should be the norm. Any sensitive human individual should be against violence, irrespective of whether you are a man or a woman. You see, so this should be the new normal, this should be the parameter, this should not be the exception, right?
One more question, from
Yes, please.
Siddharth Nag. What are the impacts of today's socio-economic problems, especially on women child?
Especially on
Women child. Culture.
see the social see, the socio-economic implications are there for everybody to see. If you flip the pages of a newspaper, it is there. If you look at Google, it is there. You just need to look at it. As I was talking about the working classes, thousands of workers going home, migrants going home. What will happen is there for everybody to see. You see, these people, the city could not become their home, so they're all going back home. So what will happen there? Obviously, women will have to manage on very limited financial resources in the days to come, because obviously these people shifted from the villages to the towns because they thought they could earn better in the towns and cities. If they are going back, there is going to be a shortage of resources, and that will reflect in every family, and the woman in the family will be responsible for the food. You see, and if the food is not right, she would be battered. You see, so these are all it's like a vicious circle, and that circle is becoming worse and worse. You see, I stay and teach in Jharkhand, which is the third poorest state in the country, and I know what the situation is in every village. It is terrible, and if in that state 40 lakh migrant workers are coming back, can you imagine the pressure it would have on the resources? And obviously, who will bear the brunt of it? The women will bear the brunt of it, because that is the way of venting patriarchal frustration and anger. So this is going to happen, no matter how pessimistic it sounds.
This is ma'am. Our question is that where do women find help?
Where do women find help?
Help.
See, in a pandemic situation, in a lockdown situation, it is especially difficult. But I think one of the biggest helps that you could have is to link to other women who think like you, and also to men who think like you. You have to form your own networks, starting from the grassroots level, because this is what is going to help. I will give you an example. It might sound very I don't know, a bit strange, but nonetheless, I'll share it with you. That is, and I was sharing it to one of my dear friends and junior colleagues a few days back, that whenever someone comes to me and speaks against another woman, the first thing I tell that person is that I do not believe it, because I do not believe it when you come to me with a story about another woman. From here it has to begin. You have to learn how to support another woman, for that matter, another right thinking person also. You have to form your own networks. Nobody is going to do it for you. Nobody, believe me. And that reminds me, and that is another of my famous favorite conclusions. That reminds me of the ending of Arvind Adiga's The White Tiger, where he says that the problem with our country is that we lie on our couches watching television and detergent and soap advertisements on the television, and we expect that the revolution would come from somewhere else. It would come from Pakistan, it would come from China, it would come from somewhere. But the problem is, the revolution is not going to come from anywhere. It has to come from you. We have to begin. And as teachers and as scholars and as intellectuals, for whatever we are worth, I think it is we people who have to make a beginning, come out of the ivory towers and make a beginning. If you can begin with your domestic help, she can go and link to another 5 people, and they can link to another 20 people, and thereby a self-help group can be formed. This is how one works, and this is the only way it is going to work. This is what I feel.
Nidhi asked more that actually the police in India are not much helpful. They advise for settlement. What are the possible outcome? Solutions? Yes.
Hello, I think there are lots of questions, but we should stop the session now and stop grueling our respected speaker. I think she's tired answering questions one after another. I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I have to, because I think loads of questions are coming in.
Yes, sir. Yes.
I think we should call it a day. Okay, later take some rest also.
Sum up.
So we are very sorry, audience. We have to stop it here. Ma'am, thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your relevant and very thought-provoking lecture. We hope in your future we shall have you as our speaker again. Thank you, ma'am. So goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and let me announce tomorrow's schedule. Tomorrow we are going to have 3 invited speakers. In the first slot from 12 to 12:30, the lecture will be delivered by Dr. Narendra Ranjan Malas. In the second slot, it will be delivered by Dr. Narugopal Mukherjee, and in the third slot, it will be delivered by Dr. Tuhin Majumdar. Okay, so yes, we hope everyone, we hope to meet everyone tomorrow. Till then, goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you, the audience. There were some network glitches. Yes. Thank you very much.